Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But now I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the influential Tory backbench MP, Jacob Rees Mogg. Jacob, you are the leader of a group in Parliament, the European Research Group, which has got very clear views on the sort of Brexit that we should be negotiating. As I understand it, what you'd like is really a pretty bog-standard free trade deal with the EU. So you must have been delighted that the EU signalled that it didn't like the proposal that the Prime Minister put, which would have involved an ongoing role, for example, for the European Court of Justice.
Well, what the Prime Minister set out in relation to the European Court of Justice is something that any Eurosceptic can accept. Because,
really? In respect of medicines and chemicals and aviation?
The Prime Minister was absolutely clear that how we regulate our medicines will be up to us, but that the Medicines Agency, being a European agency, will be subject to the European Court of Justice. But that doesn't make us subject to the European Court of Justice.
But it does if she got her way of being an associate member, surely?
No, it doesn't. The internal rules of the Medicines Agency are subject to the European Court of Justice, but we have made a decision or not to join that, and we would regulate our own medicines as we saw fit, and we would then decide, if the ECJ came out with a judgment, whether we wanted to apply it or not, whereas currently the ECJ is automatic law in this country, and that's a fundamental difference. So we
well, it's a fundamental difference, but if you're right that that is indeed what's on the Prime Minister's mind, and I'm not sure it is completely...
The Prime Minister's completely clear about that.
But in which case there's literally no chance of the EU allowing us into these agencies, because that would be a clear case of having one's cake and eating it.
No, it wouldn't. The Prime Minister is absolutely clear that the sovereign legal structures of both the EU and the United Kingdom must be respected in any deal, and that our law would be independent of EU law, and that where we were involved with agencies, we would make a decision either to accept or reject any judgments as they came along, in the same way as we do with the European Court of Human Rights. The European Court of Human Rights does not have direct effect in UK law, but it can be implemented by the British Parliament, which is why voters' rights, prisoners' rights to vote took so long to come through, because Parliament wasn't happy with that judgment.
Just to be clear, you're happy about our relationship in respect to the Parliament's relationship with the European Court of Human Rights? You're happy about that?
That is a perfectly reasonable setup, because Parliament can refuse to bring into UK law a judgment of the European Court of Human Rights.
So something equivalent to that you would be
Something equivalent to that I think would be the best solution for the implementation period as it happens.
No, but I'm talking about the period subsequently. Would you be happy about that subsequently?
Well, the period beyond that, where it relates to agencies that we may belong to, but no, not as an overall superior court.
So just to be clear, if we could get a deal like that gave us preferential customs rights, you wouldn't be in favour of that?
It certainly shouldn't be the Court of Arbitration in terms of the trade deal that we have. That should be an independent body, as the Prime Minister has set out, as is commonplace in trade deals. The CETA deal with Canada has an independent arbitration mechanism.
Well, we'll see what we get, but given that you would be most comfortable with the kind of trade deal that Canada has got, wouldn't you urge the Prime Minister to simply get on and negotiate that? Because it's clear that the rest of the European Union is prepared to give us that, and attempts to get more than that are using up so much ministerial time, so much civil service time, that isn't there just a massive opportunity cost in trying to get something better, which you don't think will yield anything particularly for the UK?
I'm supporting what the Prime Minister is trying to do, because I recognise... Why? Because I recognise all of us have to compromise to some extent. So, yes, of course, from a perfect point of view, I would rather not be in the agencies. But that if that is the price to pay to get an overall trade deal, and if that is something that unites the country and the Conservative Party, then that is something that I can live with, because there won't be direct effect of European Court of Justice jurisdiction. Do I think the Prime Minister is right to argue for that? Well, I'm willing to go along with what she has set out as a package, and therefore I have to accept that part of it, though I'm less enthusiastic about that part than other parts.
Now, later this week, we'll learn from the Chancellor that that very big debt on the public sector balance sheet is falling a smidgen in terms of the proportion of GDP, but it'll still be roughly 85% of our national income, still very high by historic standards. Now, lots of your colleagues think that this is therefore the moment for austerity to come to an end, for the Chancellor to be more generous in terms of funding public services. There are others who say, but the debt is still very high. Where do you stand on this?
Well, this is not the time to start spending money like there's no tomorrow.
Right.
That there is still a large debt and there is still a high annual deficit. And I think to exclude various bits of government expenditure, such as interest payments, is a mistaken way of approaching it. I think you need to look at the total figure.
Sure.
Having said that, there are some pressures in the public sector, particularly in health, where I think the government is going to need to...
So you'd like to see a more generous settlement for the health service?
I would like to see the dividend of leaving the European Union devoted to the health service. I think people felt that was promised during the referendum campaign. And the figures on health spending in real terms since 2010 is a 1.1% increase, whereas in the period of the Conservatives in government from 79 to 97, it was 3.4%. So we're running at a significantly lower real terms increase in health spending currently. And with an ageing population and with increasing medical sophistication, I don't think it's realistic to expect that the current levels of spending can be maintained.
And very briefly on the issue that is dividing the cabinet, which is defence spending, where are you in terms of that argument? Gavin Williamson arguing that he needs a much bigger budget.
Well, we clearly have great threats to face. What has happened with Russia shows us, assuming it is Russia, but that seems a reasonable assumption, that there are serious threats to the defence of this country. And we read in the papers that the follow-up may be a cyber attack and that Russia has been involved in cyber attacks previously. We have to be very conscious of the threats that there are in the world, but there is limited money. And so the question is, where do you get the money from? And anybody who wants to propose increased spending needs to identify where it is coming from. And that is the challenge for the government.
Now, in terms of the Russian threat, and you just mentioned the Russian cyber threat, as it happens, I took a quick look at your Twitter feed, and there are some slightly odd accounts promoting you. Have you looked to see whether or not there might be Russian bots, for example, essentially promoting your tweets or promoting Jacob Rees Mogg?
I have no idea. I would be very surprised. I can't think why the Russians should wish to...
Well, except they do have a history of basically sowing dissent by... I mean, they promote all sorts of people. There's not sort of method other than to sort of...
Look, I just don't know. I don't know who looks at my Twitter feed or not. I know I've got a certain number of...
Maybe you should have a look.
But people can do so and they're not. I mean, I met the Russian ambassador and he's a perfectly friendly and amiable chap, but I think Russia is a real threat to this country. We should take it extremely seriously and we should implement as tough measures as we can possibly implement if it turns out that the Salisbury attack was masterminded by Russia. It is simply outside the international order for a country to go around murdering people in another country's territory, as it was for them to have invaded the Crimea. And we cannot deal with a rogue state as if it is a normal state. So how many bots may be promoting me? Let me be quite clear that Russia is a threat to our security and we must respond robustly.
Now, a really easy question for you. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. In terms of who should lead the Tory party into the next election, Theresa May or Jacob Rees Mogg?
Oh, Theresa May. She is a fine leader and she has my full support.
And there's no question of you wanting to be leader before the next election?
I'm not a runner, there's no vacancy. I mean, I've answered this question in so many forums. I am not a candidate.
Jacob, so nice to see you.
It's a great pleasure.
Looking forward to seeing you very soon, I hope. I'm delighted to be joined from Salford by Labour's Becky Long-Bailey. Becky, lovely to see you.
Hello.
The Chancellor will announce on Tuesday that Britain's public sector debt as a share of our national income is falling at last. Doesn't that show that their austerity, their approach to managing the public finances has worked?
Well, no, I think he's going to be under a lot of pressure, supposedly from Brexiteers within the cabinet, to paint quite a rosy picture. He'll point to the public sector net debt, he'll point to the deficit he's likely to reach, the forecasts that were put forward in November's budget. He might try and talk up productivity. We've seen increases in the last 2 quarters, but what he'll fail to say is that 2 quarters don't make a recovery, and we've actually seen stagnation over the last 10 years. In fact, that stagnation's been so bad, we haven't seen a period this bad since just after the Napoleonic Wars. He might try and talk up employment. The Conservatives are always trying to tell us how well they're doing on their employment figures, but they won't tell us that over 3 million people are in insecure work and that real wages are still stagnating. They're not likely to reach 2010 levels anytime soon, so we're clearly not seeing a recovery. And
but on the issue of productivity, I mean, we have now seen an increase. You must welcome that.
We do welcome it, but it's 2 quarters, Robert, so let's not all get too excited about that. What we want to see is prolonged periods of increased productivity. But the government is slashing spending and funding some of the critical areas that are required to improve our productivity. So skills, for example, we're seeing the first real-term cuts in school spending that we've seen for 20 years. We saw £1.15 billion cut from the adult skills budget. So they're essentially cutting off the oxygen supply to improving our productivity. And then in relation to their industrial strategy, they put forward their white paper recently, and it was all full of lovely rhetoric, which we wouldn't dispute, but it was very unambitious and really wasn't backed up with real investment and real detail. So an example that I'd give is that they're increasing investment in research and development, which is a critical part of improving our productivity. They want to raise it to 2.4%, which is an OECD average. We've said that we want 3%, and the reason for that is that some of the leading industrial nations within the OECD are currently at 3%. So if we want to punch above our weight and really lead the world, especially in the 4th industrial revolution, we have to put the investment where it's required.
Now,
and they're not doing that.
Now, the other day, John McDonnell said he thought Britain was ready to become a socialist country. Which socialist country do you think is a model for us?
I don't think we should point to any particular country. Britain is unique, and it always has been. But when he refers to a socialist country, it's underpinned by principles of fairness and developing an economy that works for everyone, and that means providing the investment that we need to businesses, infrastructure, all the tools that we need to provide growth. And that when we've achieved that prosperity, it's shared fairly to all communities across the UK. And we've not seen that in recent years. We're the most regionally unequal country in the whole of Europe, according to the Economic Justice Commission.
No, look, there are obviously big structural issues that any government would have to address, but wouldn't it reassure people if you could point to another government, another country that you admire?
I don't think there's any particular country that I think would come even anywhere close to what we're proposing to achieve for Britain. As I said, it's unique.
Isn't that quite scary for people if we're launching ourselves into the unknown?
No, what's scary about investing in infrastructure, investing in skills, investing in our future to make sure that we have a prosperous economy? And what's scary about saying that everybody should share in that prosperity? This is socialism, and it's about developing a fair society where everybody pays their fair share and they really have the chance to aspire and achieve. We'll provide those building blocks. That's what socialism is.
Now, you are in, I think it's the lucky position of being a member of Labour's ruling NEC. Who are you going to be backing, the Unite candidate Jenny Formby or John Lansman of Momentum?
Well, look, I take my role on the NEC very seriously, and it's important to make the point here that it's not an election. This is a job interview, and we haven't seen the full raft of candidates yet. And as a member of the NEC, we will interview those candidates, we will look at the various strengths and weaknesses that they may have and come to a decision on the best candidate for the job. Now, a number of the candidates that we've seen so far, Jenny and John Lansman, for example, have got fantastic strength, but we want to see the whole suite of candidates, and we'll make an informed decision at the time.
What's the significance of the fact that there is this dispute between Momentum and Unite? Because up to now, we've thought of them as essentially being part of a common pro-Jeremy Corbyn project.
Well, I think it's been hyped up quite a lot in the media. It's important to have a wide range of candidates to come forward to apply for this position, and that's what's happened. And I think it's important that we assess them on their relevant merits. So as opposed to, you know, what particular element of the Labour Party they follow, because we shouldn't have different, you know, wings of the party. We're all part of one party, and we need a General Secretary that recognises that and has the appropriate qualities and skills for the job.
Now, many people see you and Angela Rayner as today's Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, the great hopes for the future of the Labour Party. So I wondered, have you had that conversation with Angela about, as and when the time comes, which of the two of you is going to be running for leader?
No, no. I mean, Angela's one of my best friends, and we actually live together in London. I think our main conversation comes down to what we're going to have for tea, rather than what we're going to do in the future.
But you must have learned from the terrible tensions that were there between Tony and Gordon because of the misunderstandings of who was going to do what. Surely you've got to have that conversation at some point.
No, I mean, we both see our jobs as, you know, focusing on getting Labour elected. We've both got each of our, you know, particular strengths in our areas, and we concentrate on those. And we talk a lot about skills, for example, where our areas overlap, but we want to make sure that Labour gets elected at the next general election, and we want to put forward a strong suite of policies that will transform Britain for the better.
Lovely to talk to you, Becky. You come back soon.
It's a pleasure.